Hello, good morning, good afternoon, or perhaps it's evening. My name is Herricia Willis. I'm an attorney at law practicing in Grenada for the past 6 years. As a slight background, I'm also an attorney at law in Jamaica and admitted as a solicitor of the Supreme Court of England and Wales in 2000. Well, I'm here today to inform you of wonderful news. I intend to advise and promote law in Grenada because Grenada matters.
So this week, we're talking immigration, correct?
That is correct. In fact, we're going to look at one section, Section 11 of the Immigration Act.
Okay, and what would that be?
Well, basically, I'll read it word for word because it's very important. Section 11, Section 11 of the Immigration Act states, subject to the provisions of this act, an alien shall not enter or embark in Grenada except with the leave of an immigration officer, and shall not enter or embark otherwise than at an approved port or such other place as an immigration officer may in any particular case allow. So basically an alien, in this instance, because it's immigration, we are talking about asylum seekers.
Okay. So in terms of asylum seekers, how does this relate to the island of Grenada?
Well, basically, currently Grenada lacks national refugee law.
What does that mean?
Well, basically, the government has not established formal channels to provide protection for refugees or asylum seekers.
And so how long has this been for?
Well, basically, as I've said, Grenada has not enacted any asylum seeking laws. So Grenada remains the only one of the 5 states in the Caribbean region that has not acceded to the international refugee instruments.
And why is that?
Grenada is a signatory to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Human rights are rights inherent to all human beings. When I say inherent, it's that it applies to all human beings, regardless of their race, their sex, their nationality, ethnicity, language, religion, or any other status. Human rights include the right to life, to liberty, freedom from slavery and torture, freedom of opinion and expression. Also the right to work and receive education, and many more rights. Basically, these rights are under Chapter 1 of the Grenada Constitution. In fact, most constitution of the Caribbean and Commonwealth.
Okay, so how does that affect someone seeking asylum in Grenada? If they come to Grenada seeking asylum, what's the procedure?
Grenada currently lacks national refugee law, and the government has not established formal channels to provide protection for refugees or asylum seekers. Basically, Grenada is a non-party state to the 1951 Convention on the Status of Refugees. This convention defines a refugee and outlines the rights of those refugees, as well as the legal obligations of states to protect. So basically, as Grenada is not a party to the 1951 convention, they have no obligations to protect refugees. Right, I've said that the convention defines what a refugee is. Well, basically, a refugee is a person who, owing to well-founded fear of being persecuted because of their race, their religion, their nationality, even political opinion, outside their country of nationality, and they're unable or owing to fear cannot avail themselves of the protection of their country. So they go to another country to obtain refuge.
So how does an asylum seeker work?
Well, the asylum seeker, that works the same way as a refugee.
Okay. So what is an asylum seeker?
Somebody who is persecuted in their country of birth, and they leave that country for another. So they're actually, as the word says, they're seeking asylum in another country which is not their birth nation. Right, we said that Grenada has not enacted any laws. So what happens? The United Nations has taken responsibility for determining the refugee status of any asylum seeker. So in this instance, because Grenada does not have any asylum seeking laws, the UNCHR steps in. The United Nations Commission on Human Rights. That's what the UNCHR stands for. The United Nations Commission on Human Rights was established in 1946, directly after the Second World War. And it was established to weave international legal fabric that protects fundamental rights and freedoms to the signatory countries. Of course, the UNCHR acts as a forum where countries large and small, also non-governmental groups and human rights defenders, just like Earl Maitland, can voice their concerns. I've already explained what the human rights are. In fact, under the Universal Declaration, there is 30 specific independent human rights, i.e. relating to life, liberty, freedom from slavery and torture. I did mention that before, okay? I've got a specific date. On the 10th of December 1948, the General Assembly of the United Nations announced the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And for 7 decades on, well, 8 decades, isn't it? The rights, they all include and they continue to form the basis for all international human rights law. So basically, back to Grenada, all matters relating to asylum seekers and refugees in Grenada are covered by the UNCH's regional office in Washington, not Geneva, but in Washington.
Why in Washington and not Geneva?
It's basically the Commonwealth. The Grenada is much closer to America.
Right, Geneva being in Europe.
Correct.
Right, I hear that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the United Nations, they do a full investigation of the asylum seeker to qualify that their story is real. They interview them. Sometimes the interview could be several hours or even several days or weeks. They need to verify that individual's story. And only then, after that verification, that individual or individuals, they get a certificate to say they are a protected individual and the country where they've entered should not deport them. So basically what I'm saying, the United Nations would not back a criminal, they would not back a terrorist or any threat to the country where the asylum seeker has entered. So in the absence of national, I say national because within Grenada, asylum and refugee legislation and procedures, the UNCHR in Washington conducts registration and refugee status determination. They decide if there's any solution. The only solution for Grenada is voluntary repatriation and resettlement of that refugee or asylum seeker in another country.
Okay. What power does what power do they have?
Well, the United Nations is an international organization. They cannot actually get themselves involved in the internal affairs of a country. They can issue requests to the offending state to release or not to deport that individual. In certain instances, they enter the country, but that is usually extreme cases. But the United Nations, and when I say United Nations, I'm dealing with the United Nations Commission on Human Rights. They do not work alone. They work with the International Red Cross Society. Everybody knows about the Red Cross Society.
For those who don't know, what is the Red Cross Society? Briefly.
Briefly, they're the largest humanitarian network in the world. Its mission is to prevent, reduce human suffering. They protect life and health, and they uphold dignity, especially during armed conflicts and other emergencies. They enter countries and they assist. So
right,
they have been assigned to assist asylum seekers.
So inside of Grenada, who can people go to for human rights and human rights issues?
Well, within Grenada, they do have organizations, human rights organizations, to assist.
And how effective are they in these situations?
At present, not very effective.
And why is this the case?
I cannot actually put my finger on it and say, but I believe Earl Maitland did discuss this in one of his interviews. Perhaps I should refer that to him.
Yeah. We'll bring him on later and talk to him.
Good.
So, in terms of this situation, the process, so an asylum seeker comes to Grenada, they seek refuge. What should be the procedure for that asylum seeker?
Right. I've outlined the United Nations and I've outlined the International Red Cross. Right. The Grenada, most countries have a Red Cross office. Grenada also has a Red Cross office with a president. I think the president is Miss Dixon, Samantha Dixon. But each country, I believe Trinidad, Barbados, and so forth, they work in line or in conjunction with the United Nations. So, for instance, where an individual arrives in Grenada by sea, for instance, so they are not going through the normal immigration port at the airport. The asylum seeker would arrive at the Red Cross office. And I believe I did mention, if I haven't, 5 asylum seekers have been to the Red Cross office in the past 3 years. So basically, when an asylum seeker goes to the Red Cross office, the Red Cross is under duty to inform the immigration department in Grenada. They are also under duty to inform the United Nations that an asylum seeker has entered the country. So at that stage, when an asylum seeker enters the country, 3 different organizations are aware. That is the International Red Cross, i.e. Grenada Red Cross, the United Nations, and of course, the Immigration Department. So when these 3 bodies are aware of the individual, and of course, as Grenada does not have any laws, the United Nations in Washington, like I said, would assist with the registration and determination of that individual's status to be an asylum seeker. So all Grenada needs to do is to secure the individual in the country until the United Nations repatriates that individual. Grenada is not under any duty to take on that refugee just for a while until the United Nations move them to another country.
Well, would it be safer for the refugee or asylum to be moved on to another country because there's no real laws to protect them?
That is why they are moved to other country.
If Grenada didn't move them on, would that not be a violation?
Not necessarily. If Grenada is happy to accept that individual, I'm sure the country, he'd be just assimilated into the population with other Grenadans.
But what about if, for example, this asylum seeker gets imprisoned and then his human rights are violated? Then what?
Well, that is the problem we are in. Because Grenada does not have any laws to protect these individuals.
I know you talked about 5 other refugees that went through the Red Cross. What happened to those 5? What's the stories about those 5?
I believe the majority or all of them have settled now in other countries.
That's positive to hear.
Of course,
So the process does work.
it does work and it has worked in the past, and we hope it will continue to work. But of course, if there's no laws in place, it is unfortunate when things happen.
Well, there is a case at the moment with a young man that has from Africa that is now being in prison, and he sought refuge, asylum, right in Grenada. I want to bring Earl Maitland in. He's a Grenadian activist and obviously the part of the Grenada Empowerment Movement, the leader of the Grenada Empowerment Movement, Earl Maitland. I'd like to bring him into the room and to discuss matters relating to this. So we have in the room Grenada Empowerment Movement leader and activist, Earl Maitland. Good afternoon, Earl.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. A pleasant good afternoon to you both.
So, Earl, we're just going to ask you your thoughts on this situation with immigration, asylum seekers, and refugees in Grenada, and how you've seen things so far.
Right. So let me first say a pleasant good afternoon to Ms. Willis and to yourself, Ingram, and congratulate you all both on the program Attorney at Law. That is much needed in Grenada, as we have many persons in the citizenry who are not aware of the laws of our country. And this by itself is a recipe, has created a lot of chaos in Grenada, Carriacou, and Bwtmonline. It has allowed those in government, especially the executive, to prejudice justice and the innocence of the judicial system. So I want to congratulate you all on having this show. It is much needed. I would like to commend Ms. Willis for all the work that she is doing. The topic today is actually about immigration and the asylum process in Grenada. And persons who are not aware, Ms. Willis has been the voice of a gentleman, an asylum seeker who came from the motherland to seek asylum here in Grenada. And he has been refused, he has been ignored, he has been neglected at Her Majesty's prison for far too long. That was since last year, August. And it is very upsetting, it is very hurtful to see that this is where we are in Grenada in 2020, especially doing something of this sort to a gentleman who shares the same complexion, a gentleman who has come from the motherland. I would also like to say, Ms. Willis has mentioned the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which has been signed on to by the government of Grenada. And what persons should know is that although Grenada has not signed on to any asylum laws or any laws that would suit the process of persons who are trying to escape persecution to actually ensure that they are not killed or they are not tortured. Under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that Grenada has signed on to, right? And I cannot doubt, right, that the Grenadian executive was not aware when they signed on to what they signed on to. We have many persons who possess that legal acumen that sit in the executive body of the government. We have the Attorney General, we have Peter David, who is in Foreign Affairs, and many others like that, who would be well aware that under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 14, it gives every human being a right to seek asylum in any country, right? And what should have happened is that the Grenadian government signing on to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, being aware that Article 14 provides for such, they should have done what is needed to be done to ensure that when persons come here to save their lives or their families' lives, that they do not have to be incarcerated at Her Majesty's prison, right? The Constitution of Grenada is a good reflection of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, especially when we look at Chapter 1, where it has freedom of movement, freedom of association, and so forth. These things have come under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is an agreement between all the countries that have signed on. Now, what Grenada has to do is to put laws in place so persons such as the asylum seeker who has been at Her Majesty's prison would not have been there since last year, August. So, as I said, Ms. Willis has been the voice for that gentleman. I believe earlier in the show, Ingram, you asked the question, do we have any human rights organizations in Grenada? And my answer to you, my truthful, genuine, and dispassionate answer would be no, we do not have any human rights organizations in Grenada. What we do have are persons who are parading themselves as voices for the hopeless, as human rights agents, but this is not the case. Now, what Ms. Willis is doing as an attorney, um, this is what is supposed to be happening through the Grenada Human Rights Organization under Milton Coy. This is what the government of Grenada is supposed to be doing. The Attorney General's office should have been doing this, and they are not doing it. So, no, we do not have any human rights organizations in Grenada. What we have, in my personal opinion, are a bunch of people collecting monies under the guise that they would stand for human rights. Um, I'm very thankful to have persons like Ms. Herricia Willis, who stands for justice, who stands for the people, not only the people of Grenada, but the people of the world. And it is very upsetting to see that her many pleas seem to have fallen on deaf ears. She has been on the local media, on the radio stations, on the newspapers, on social media, and it seems as though, the people who should be taking up this responsibility, they are basically doing nothing. I have heard nothing from these organizations. And this is why I believe it is important, to continue giving Ms. Willis the assurance that, I will be there. And there are other persons who what she is doing. The condition that this gentleman has been placed in at Her Majesty's prison, it is it is inhumane. It is inhumane. When we look at the condition of our facilities, of our holding cells, which even the public has to go to, and we're not speaking about the prison as yet, we're speaking about the police stations where persons would be arrested and detained, persons who have not yet been proven to be guilty. The conditions of our holding cells in Grenada, is alarming. It is filthy. It is disgusting. It is not a place where human beings should be. Now, this is the cells for the police stations. Now, approximately 3 weeks ago, a gentleman from the parish of St. Andrew was arrested and charged, and he was placed in the Grenville police station based on the information that I have received from that gentleman. And he was locked up with a next gentleman who had some mental issues. And that gentleman defecated inside of the cell. And the guy who was arrested and charged, he said to me that he had to keep calling the police officers at the Grenville police station to come and clean the feces of the gentleman who has some mental issues. And based on what he said, and this is what I related to the community relations department and the commissioner of police, he had to call them from the night until about midday when they served lunch the next day, having to stay inside the cell of a police station, inhaling that foul smell of stool from a next human being. Right? The officers refused to clean it. Based on my experience and my knowledge, this has been something that has been going on for far too long.
And
There,
how do you know this?
I have been a victim of police brutality here in Grenada. I have unfortunately been brought into the cell of the police station due to police abusing their authority. And I have seen firsthand, more over a decade ago, the condition of the prison. And it remains, not the prison, but of the police station cell. And it remains the same. You know, we have a thick coat of stool that lines the toilet bowl, right? The toilet bowls cannot be flushed and so on. Now, this is what we are speaking about, the actual, the police station, which is open in the public arena. Now, when we get to the prison, Her Majesty's prison is not much different. In fact, it most likely would be worse. You know, based on what I was told, I was never locked up at Her Majesty's prison. But what I did was, as a patriot of this country, as one who saw the need for rehabilitation, because there's not much focus at Her Majesty's prison for rehabilitation. What it is more punishment than anything else. It's about just taking away the rights of persons. I volunteered over a year's period at Her Majesty's prison where I taught mathematics and I brought in a music program. And based on the testimonies of the inmates who were under my care during the period of which I tutored, they related some information to me that was beyond inhumane, where they informed me that the toilet bowls are broken, they cannot flush, there's no clean water. This was in about 2017, 2018, thereabout. It was really sad, and finding out that persons who were even placed on remand, who have not been proven guilty by a court of law, were sent to such a facility, would have moved me enough, to try to make a difference. And this is why I'm thankful that Miss Willis is here. Now we have an asylum seeker, a gentleman who escaped persecution, a gentleman who ran for his life, who came to the Grenadian people, his brothers and sisters in Grenada, trying to seek asylum, something that is guaranteed under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 14, which the government of Grenada has signed onto. And he was imprisoned by the Grenadian government. He was sent to prison since last year, August 2019. That is over a year and 2 or 3 months, I believe, which is very disheartening. And to see that someone who is seeking asylum would be sent to such a facility, it is very disturbing to even comprehend that something like that could actually happen in reality. You know, it moves me in jam. It really moves me to see that, this battle, Miss Willis has taken up this battle since approximately 8 months ago, thereabout, and it still continues. It is very alarming, and it says a lot about the Grenadian government that we have had two major embarrassing situations when it comes to persons who have been seeking asylum here in Grenada over the last couple months. This gentleman who's housed at Her Majesty's prison is not the first person. If one may recall, there has been a gentleman who came from Cameroon, an ex-African brother who was actually locked up at the Central Police Station. And had it not been for the intervention of Miss Willis, attorney at law, and Miss Rolanda McQueen, that gentleman too would have been sent to the prison, to Her Majesty's prison. Most likely, he would have been forgotten as the one that is here. And as I said, it says a lot that our government has signed on to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And
May I,
Article 40.
may I interrupt you there, Earl?
Yes, Mr.
Right. The fact that the government has signed onto the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it has no effect. It will have no effect unless they make domestic law to
Mhm,
put the Universal Declaration of Human Rights into Grenadian law.
mhm,
So signing is just say, yes, I'm going to do this.
mhm,
Hear the word in quotes, I'm going to do this.
mhm,
That doesn't mean that they've done it. They only do it when they've actually made their own laws
mhm,
to implement the Universal Declaration of Human Rights into their law.
mhm,
There is no such human rights law or legislation within Grenada.
mhm,
So signing has no effect. It's
mhm,
just to say, oh, I've signed that.
mhm.
Does not mean anything. That,
Which is really
that
sad.
is the problem.
Which is really sad. Really sad.
We have a parliament. This is 21st century. Human rights is a global matter
Mhm,
because of the displacement of individuals worldwide. We have CARICOM. The Commonwealth has CARICOM, which allows individuals within CARICOM, the citizens, to move around. I'm sure you heard I said Grenada is the only state
mhm,
that
mhm,
have not implemented any laws.
mhm,
Grenada has a parliament. They are able to implement human rights legislation. Okay?
yeah, yeah. And it makes you wonder, why is it that we have to have so many embarrassing situations when it comes to asylum seekers? What would it take for the government to actually take Article 14 serious? Or what would it take for the government of the day to actually honor human rights? Right? It's very, it's very frustrating. what it tells me is that we have a government, an executive body, a legislative body that is not functioning properly. It would seem to me that the taxpayers are spending monies, but laws are not being upheld, laws are not being passed. Once you sign on to that declaration, that universal declaration, I'm sure it would be an agreement that domestic laws would be passed, much like we have under that same universal declaration, where it guarantees a person the right to life, liberty, and security of person. We have the Constitution, which would be the domestic law. We should have that law for asylum seekers, right? I was told that the prison, Her Majesty's prison, is the only legal facility to hold someone. That is why the gentleman is there. And that is a very troubling and poor excuse, I believe. This gentleman has committed no crime. The only crime that he would have committed is trying to save his life. And one should ask themselves, what would I do to save my life? Would I break into someone's home or into someone's car to try to save my life? Would I do that? Right? How far would I go to save my life or the life of a family member or a loved one? And many times we do not look at these situations, right? So it is very unclear and very unfortunate why and how many more embarrassing situations would we need with asylum seekers before the government recognizes that it is mandated to actually implement these domestic laws for asylum seekers right here in Grenada, Carriacou, and Bwtmonline, right?
May I also interrupt again? The human rights legislation should apply to all individuals of Grenada, Carriacou, and Bwtmonline, not just asylum seekers.
Mhm.
So basically, if there's no law, no human rights for asylum seekers, there's no human rights for the nation. Because the Universal Declaration is for the whole country, not just asylum seekers.
Mhm. And we have had Grenadians who have gone to other countries to seek asylum over the years and who were successful in seeking asylum. This is a right for any living, breathing persons. And we are not speaking of a gentleman who was found to have committed any crimes in his home country. As Ms. Willis has said, um, the investigations were done by the United Nations, who have much more resources, much more credible resources than the government of Grenada. And they have found this gentleman to be qualified enough to be treated as an asylum seeker. There are persons who have come out and sponsored, right? And pledged to sponsor this gentleman, including myself. We have Miss Rolanda McQueen. We have other persons, Miss Jeanette, who would have pledged sponsor this gentleman. We would have done official letters to the government of Grenada saying, you know what, um, we recognize that there are no laws that immigration or the legislative arm has implemented. But what we are willing to do is take that burden off of the taxpayer, right? Because there is a fee. There is a fee that has to go into the continuous imprisonment of this asylum seeker at Her Majesty's prison. Of course, he has to be fed 3 times a day, every day. Of course, if he has any medical problems, he's in the custody of the state of Grenada. The Grenadian taxpayer would have to meet that cost. Of course, he would have to be clothed, and among other things. And what has happened? Ms. Willis has done the people of Grenada a justifiable job. She has said that we would rather get persons to sponsor this gentleman, so the taxpayers' monies would not have to go into incarcerating someone, but where it could go is into where we need it the most, in the health system, the education system, in the roads, into providing jobs for people. But it has been denied, right? It has been denied. I am very, I'm very, very hurt by this situation. As I said, we have had many Grenadians who have sought asylum abroad and they have been successful. Um, we should not wait until there is a third situation that we may find out about with a next person coming to Grenada to seek asylum who is not aware that Grenada, although has signed on to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Grenada does not have any asylum seeker law. So are we going to put every asylum seeker that comes to Grenada in Her Majesty's prison?
Okay.
What is the plan?
Okay. Earl, thank you very much for that.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Earl, for putting your take on matters, which is very, very appreciated. A request should be made, or will be made, or is being made to the government of Grenada to enact laws to assist the country to implement human rights into its laws, into its statute books.
Okay. Well, we look forward to speaking to you again soon, Miss Willis.
Thank
for
you.
next episode. And thank you so much for your expertise.
Thank you.